Hi, my name is Stewart Bond, and I work for International Data Corporation, or IDC. IDC is the premier global provider of market intelligence, advisory services, and events for the information technology, telecommunications, and consumer technology markets. I'm IDC's analyst focused on researching the worldwide data integration and data intelligence software market. My job is to track software vendors in this market, watching what new products are emerging, what business and technical problems they're solving for their customers, and how much money vendors are making so I can publish market shares, forecasts, and trends reports.
Stewart, welcome and thank you for spending time with us today.
Of course, my pleasure to be here with you today, Jamie.
So your recent work at IDC speaks to future enterprise resilience, and this is an aspiration shared by many executives. And Crystal, she spoke about this in her opening keynote. Your research is opening doors to deeper understanding of the challenges in achieving resilience, with a particular focus on data architectures and data leaders. Being on the forefront of this research, I know our customers are very, very interested in learning more about where other businesses similar to their own and other data leaders like themselves are adapting to a very dynamic and fast-changing technology landscape. So let's dig into this a little bit further, starting with the current environment. So how would you describe the modern data environment?
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, I've been working with IT and data for over 30 years, and it's changed a lot in that time. When we look at where we are today, I characterize modern data environments as with 3 Ds. They're very distributed, they're highly diverse, and data is very dynamic. So let me back that up with a little bit of data. So distributed, in surveys we've done, 95% of organizations are integrating data across hybrid and multi-cloud environments. So that means data is everywhere. Diverse, 73% of respondents have told us that increasing diversity of data types is a top requirement for driving their need to adopt new methods of working with data in data intelligence, data governance, and data engineering. And 77% of organizations are integrating up to 5 different types of data and pipelines, and going to up to 10 different types of data management technologies. So very diverse types of data that are out there. And data is also highly dynamic. 44% of organizations we spoke to are ingesting streaming data into pipelines, but 94% have stream processing software. So that indicates we're going to see a growth in the use of streaming data. But it's not just that data is flowing faster. That's not the only definition of dynamic. The other definition of dynamic is that data is always continuously changing. And there's a lot of different approaches that are being used right now to resolve these 3D issues. There's a big focus on centralizing data into data lakes, data lakehouses, data warehouses, but haven't we been trying to solve that problem for decades? Now, granted, modern data warehouses are much different from what we've had even only 10 years ago, but data will always be distributed, diverse, and dynamic. I believe the first step should be to centralize the intelligence about the data, and then decide if that data needs to be moved.
What we've seen in the market recently is a lot of democratization, perhaps another D. It's something that as more and more businesses make the shift to become more data-driven, obviously it's more important that more people have access, and that can be a double-edged sword. So given this trend of democratization, how do individuals and teams know what data is trustworthy and what data can be relied upon?
That's a great question, Jamie. So for me, this is the importance of data intelligence. Business intelligence is intelligence about the business found in data and analytics. Data intelligence is intelligence about the data found in metadata and analytics of metadata. Data intelligence answers the who, what, where, when, why, and how of data. Who's using it? Who can use it? What is it? What does it mean to the business? Where is it? Where did it come from and where's it going, as we can see in lineage? When was it captured? Is it still timely and relevant? Why was it captured? Why do we need to keep it? And for how long? How is it being used, and how clean or dirty, how confident should I be in any decisions that are informed by that data? For individuals to know what data can be trusted, all this intelligence about data needs to be at a minimum unified, if not centralized, and made available in catalogs and marketplaces populated by data producers for use by data consumers.
So you mentioned data producers and data consumers. And while those general classes of users really haven't changed over time, the roles within those classes have changed. So what are the important roles in this modern data environment? How has that evolved?
Yeah, that's a great follow-on question from the last one we discussed, Jamie, about the modern data environment. So who are the data producers and data consumers? We're increasingly hearing this need to create data products, which leads to the idea of a catalog or a marketplace where data producers can publish products for consumers to subscribe to or to consume. Now, this is a relatively new trend that we're seeing. But regardless of treating data as a product, the basics of organizational structure and roles needs to be considered. From surveys we've done, organizations with centralized data teams are typically more successful at data engineering and analytics. But that does not mean all people who work with data are centralized under one reporting structure. There are still slightly more organizations with a distributed structure than those with a centralized structure, as we see here. Now, regardless of organizational reporting structure, there's still a need to centralize standards, policies, technologies, and processes, and they need to be enforced by the enterprise. Here we can see the differences between mandates for operational data versus analytical data. We did find it interesting that security and privacy are at top of operational concerns, whereas it's closer to the bottom for analytical concerns. We can also see that how data relates to the business, quality, integration, and technical data intelligence is more important to analytics. And that kind of makes sense. Operationally, you want to make sure that data is protected. Analytically, you want to make sure you understand what that data is as you're working with it. Now, these mandates need to be enterprise-wide, not siloed or departmental, because the number of different roles that work with data is continuously increasing. At IDC, we've coined the term generation data, or Gen D for short, as a vocational generation that represents roles of people who work with data. Now, you don't need to have data in your title to be part of Gen D. Gen D people are data natives. Data is what they work in and with to complete their tasks, whether that be tactical or strategic. If you're expected to make data-driven decisions, if you expect or demand to know the provenance of data, if you have a sense of what information is true and what is not, if you contribute to the knowledge of data in your organization, then you're likely part of this new generation. You're part of Gen D. The roles are quite varied, from the technical locations in the business through to the line of business, people working in the business, from operations to strategy, from the back office to the front office, and even into the executive office.
Yeah, Gen D. I like that. That's it's apparent. It's everywhere around us. Everything that we do has become more and more data driven than ever. And there's people entering the workforce where that's just the standard of how they think. And as a result, it forces the evolution around data quality and trustworthiness and, data literacy. As you look at the different types of people that are interacting with data trust may mean different things. So what in your experience is needed to make data trustworthy?
Yeah, well, I answer that question with the question I'll ask about to you. What makes anything trustworthy? Well, I would argue it's transparency. If you want to know if someone is trustworthy, you want to know about what that person does, how they act, where they came from, their family, their community, what their legacy is, and so on. Now, we don't all walk around with that information readily available on our chest or on our coat. It takes time to get to know someone before you can trust them. It can't be like that with data. We need to be able to trust the data in the moment that the data is being used. Consider some examples here from the 2022 IDC Future of Intelligence Awards. The first company here deployed a series of smart meters to start to understand how people were using electricity and, of course, bill people at different rates depending on the time of day. What they were actually able to do is they collected the data from those smart meters, and they could understand if data stopped flowing from those smart meters in certain parts of the network, something might be wrong. So they actually used that information to deploy technical crews to go out and work on the network and work on those meters and get things back up and running. In addition to learning about how people are using electricity, there's a significant environmental impact here. 3% reduction in voltage, resulting in 1.5% energy savings. And sure, there's a significant dollar amount here over 20 years, but the fact that that energy is being reduced has made a significant environmental impact to the positive. Now, this next example here, the Texas Department of Transportation is using data to respond to emergency response times, reducing those emergency response times to vehicle crashes on freeways by a median of 6 minutes, as much as 20 minutes, potentially saving countless lives. It's critical. And you've got to be able to trust the data in the moment as you're making those decisions to deploy those emergency response teams. Insurance, to build trust in the data, this helped people started with understanding the business's pain point. And a part of that was the need to elevate the data conversation and breaking down organizational boundaries and really elevating that use of data intelligence to break down those silos. And by doing that, they were able to deploy the delivery time of essential business dashboards was able to be deployed 80% faster, enabling those senior executives to make daily decisions on how to best deploy critical capital. So those are just some examples on how you need to trust data in the moment. And how do you have the transparency into the data to know if it can be trusted? For me, that's data intelligence. And you can see here that there's some significant differences between these two surveys, each taken a year apart. The chart on the left is from a data culture survey that we did in the fall of December 2020. The chart on the right is from the data trust survey that we did a year later in December of 2021. Obviously, we've got some misunderstandings and missed expectations here because we can see that those things that are important, that people want to know about their data as they're making a data-driven decision, the data intelligence that's at the top of the chart on the left shows up at the bottom of the chart on the right in terms of what organizations are actually good at doing these days. So we've got a problem here. We're not delivering that intelligence that needs to be delivered.
It's amazing how different the expectations are, as your research has found. And if I step back for the moment to the first part of your comments, the business outcomes that you shared are so powerful, and it's so important for the types of people that are on this, that are watching this discussion, understand and recognize how much impact their work can have for their organizations, because those kinds of outcomes are possible everywhere. But as you point out, it's not without challenges. We actually just conducted our own market research, and it's called the Data Health Barometer. We just released it recently. But some of our key findings that while virtually everybody recognizes how important data is to their organization, 36% of companies report that trusting data is still a major challenge. So you have more than a third of the businesses that, just trying to run the business on a day-to-day basis, just have trust issues. So what do you think, based on the research and everything that you found, is driving that gap?
That's interesting, Jamie, because your percentages aren't far off from the percentages that we've uncovered in our research in that data trust survey that we did last year. And part of the answer to that question is the chart that we have up right now. It shows that lack of our ability to deliver intelligence about the data to the people that need it. which means there's a lack of intelligence available, in part because there's actually a lack of adoption of data intelligence technologies. What's the most used data catalog solution today? Well, it's actually the spreadsheet. Recall that we started out our discussion today on how distributed, diverse, and dynamic the modern data environment is. It's always changing. A spreadsheet or document that provides data intelligence is likely out of date as soon as you hit that save button. Now, solutions can continuously harvest metadata and analyze to provide data intelligence are low on the priority list of technology teams from the surveys that we've done. And they're even lower on the adoption curve. I recently did several reference interviews with organizations using data catalogs. And the biggest challenge they face, each one of those organizations faced, was adoption. The interesting thing here is, though, that the more people that use these technologies, the more valuable the intelligence about that data becomes, because they're adding their own intelligence to that collective knowledge about the data. Leveraging intelligence to improve trust in the data should also change the way people work. The reason we have low adoption is because nobody likes to change. And therefore, it's imperative that data intelligence is not static, not hard to access, but it too needs to be dynamic and embedded into the data-driven processes that we have in our organizations.
Yeah, so that is the intelligence or the lack of intelligence about data has a significant impact on trust. Trust has a significant impact on adoption. Adoption has it's kind of that critical piece that you need to have in order to drive the business outcomes that you want. But it really, when you kind of unwind it all and kind of get down to the root cause, or the root, the thing that's most important that businesses really need to solve for, it kind of comes down to the intelligence behind the data. Have you found any patterns in or differences in the types of individuals or what kind of roles trust data more than others?
Yeah, we did. This chart here represents the profile of roles that completed our data trust survey about a year ago. And we asked them, how much do you trust the data in your organization on a scale of 1 to 10? The people who are closest to the data, the ones that know the data the most, they're the ones that do not completely trust the data compared to those that are further away from it. Why is this? Well, those that are closest to the data see the imperfections. They see the inconsistencies and the ambiguities. Transparency in this case helps those closest to the data know where the problems are, but also tells them what needs to be corrected. Now, in another related question, we learned that respondents believe that the CEO and IT, they trust the data the most. Our hypothesis here is that there's a lot of effort being made by those that are closest to the data to improve the quality and usefulness of that data so that those who make data-driven decisions, who need to trust the data, can trust the data. We also think that perhaps IT trusts the data more because it's mostly accountable for that data. And if you're answering the survey and you're part of IT and you say you don't trust the survey, you may not answer the survey quite the way you would like to. So it might be problematic if IT doesn't trust the data. Now, in a more recent survey, we heard that, talking about the executives, in a more recent survey, we heard that 74% of respondents indicated that active use of data by senior management was also very or extremely critical in building trust. As organizations look to build a data culture and build data literacy, senior management need to be role models. They need to show that they trust the data and they work with the data to get the rest of the organization to work with the data as well. Not only do those that are closest to the data trust it the least, but the level of trust in data diminishes as data gets further away from its source. In many cases, it's the data in the operational applications that end up in the reporting and analytics, operational and analytical data stores. But the level of trust continues to degrade as data moves away from its origin, its context, its meaning, and its shape can become distorted. So much so that there's 10% less trust at the edge here, and a 40% reduction in the number of people that trust data at the edge, including streaming data, and those that trust data in the center. This is where intelligence about data can provide the transparency that's required to trace data back to its source and understand how it changes as it's being distributed through the organization.
Yeah, so those are some amazing insights. And sitting where I sit, I know these are very fixable problems, but can deliver a huge impact. I mentioned earlier the potential for massive business outcomes when data trust issues are solved. Have you done any research on what our audience could expect by taking on these kinds of challenges?
Yeah, Jamie. So in the data trust survey that we've been talking about, we asked if the level of data quality and trust had a positive, neutral, or negative impact affecting business outcomes. For the 63% that said it had a positive impact, we asked how much of a positive impact. These are the results. At the top of the list is customer satisfaction, industry innovation, time to market, employee retention. At the bottom of the list is profit and revenue, but look at the percentage increases. These increases for these two metrics are substantial for any company of any size. Now, it shouldn't be too far of a stretch to understand why higher data quality and trust improves customer satisfaction. Every customer interaction has become digital, and data informs digital experiences. The old saying, it could take years to gain a customer's loyalty and minutes to lose it, is now days to gain and milliseconds to lose. Now, the opposite is also true. Lower levels of data quality and trust can have a negative impact on business metrics. We do not know how much of a negative impact, but I can tell you that on average, 11% of the respondents indicated negative impacts, with operational costs being impacted the most out of all of these business outcomes. Now, again, it shouldn't take too much of an imagination to draw the connections between bad data and operational costs. Bad data equals bad decisions, and a lack of trust in data equals more time and effort spent looking for the right data and cleaning up the data and so on. Now, when we look at these metrics and look at these outcomes, a chief data officer, a data leader, data executive really should be more interested in measuring the business value that the data is making for the organization than in how clean or dirty the data is, how much data is being processed, or the number of critical data elements under management. But you still need to measure those things to make sure you're continuing to make progress in the efforts that you're taking to clean up your data and put more trust in your data.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So what kind of guidance would you offer to our audience as they prepare for 2023?
Yeah, absolutely. We've been talking about data intelligence technology, so implementing those solutions is critical. But more importantly, as we discussed, is adoption of that technology and use of that technology. And the need to embed data intelligence into data-driven activities at all levels. And you can't improve what you're not measuring. So you need to be able to measure the success of your data initiatives through their impact on your business outcomes.
All right, Stewart, thank you so much for the amazing information and insights. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. And thank you again so much for your time.
Now comes the part I enjoy the most about my job, speaking with data leaders about the realities of the modern data environment. Joining me now is Talend customer Charles Link, Senior Director of Data and Analytics at Covanta. Charles, Covanta. I'm not sure I'd heard much about Covanta before I got asked to do this interview with you. Could you share a little bit more about what Covanta does?
Covanta is a world leader in sustainable waste management, helping businesses and communities capitalize on the benefits of zero waste to landfill, using our revolutionary technology and expertise to recover, recycle, and reimagine waste for the benefit of tomorrow.
Every year, the average person generates nearly 1 ton of waste, with more than 250 million tons of garbage being buried in U.S. landfills annually. At Covanta, we are working to change that and ensure no waste is ever wasted. We believe the materials discarded every day should be utilized to their fullest potential to preserve the world's valuable resources and generate clean energy for our communities and the world we live in. This is how Covanta is powering today and protecting tomorrow.
Charles, tell us a little bit more about yourself and your role at Covanta.
I joined Covanta about 3 years ago, and when I got here, it was greenfield. There was no real data program, just a couple of reporting analysts writing reports based on spreadsheets. But the senior leadership here identified and understood the need of good data. So we built out a program that involves an integrated vertical of advanced analytics, data visualization, data platforms, data integration, data governance, data operations, and data strategy. And the key piece of that brings all of this together is that all of that's aligned with the business value and the objectives of the organization as a whole. And these things are how we do it. So the data program is up and running and really showing some nice results.
Nice. So you talked a bit there, and you said that the data program is showing some really nice results at Covanta. How would you define good data usage, or perhaps what one might call data excellence?
You know, the best way to measure it is in the velocity and effectiveness of the actions that are being taken and decisions being made that are based on the data that we are providing through our data supply chain. Everything else supports that. And so we make a special point of making sure that we bring credibility and trust in our data by being able to go from eyes on glass back to fingers on keyboard, or in many cases, IoT sensor devices. Not all data comes from fingertips anymore. But the ability of our organization to do something to drive the growth that we are seeking and to ensure that we have the positive impact on the environment that we strive for, they have to believe in the data that they're using if they're going to go fast.
So it sounds like you've got some experience there in dealing with data that maybe is not that trustworthy, and which is one of the reasons you put the program into place. So knowing firsthand the difference between teams that are not confident in their data that they have access to and the effects that might have, also knowing what it's like when the organization can count on the data. Can you speak to this a little bit more in the juxtaposition between those two extremes?
Absolutely. I mean, people really don't understand how connected the data is. So everybody who produces their piece of the answer believes in what they're doing, but none of those answers truly jive. They're different versions of the truth. And what we've done using the Talend fabric is we've been able to integrate those into a common data model, but also using the data catalog, provide the connective tissue that explains the relationship between all of these things. And in doing so, it also gets the people who are owning the data and creating it to have discussions with those who are consuming it so that they understand if it's truly fit for purpose and what process changes might need to be made in order to affect better decisions at the end points.
Yeah, a lot of people don't understand how connected that data is, that there is a supply chain there, that there's that process that it goes through. Not unlike the conversation I just had with Jamie about how data changes as it moves further away from its source, and that's because it's all connected.
Yes.
Now, it must have been quite the effort for you to get all those things into place. What were some of the business challenges that you were trying to solve with that solution?
Well, we have a very complex business because for us, it's not just about profits and growth. It's also about having a positive impact on the environment, making sure that we are helping to reduce greenhouse gases, but also good economic partners in the communities where we exist. And all of these things have to be balanced and coexist. And on top of that, we have to make sure that our workforce is safe, because we want everyone to go home in at least as good a condition as they came to work, if not better. And data, when you turn it into actionable insights, helps you find the optimal balance so that all of these things can be done in such a way that it's long-term, sustainable, and a win for all involved. Not just Covanta, but the people who live in the communities where we exist, the environment as a whole, our shareholders, all of that. Everybody needs to come out of this feeling that we are moving in a good direction financially, environmentally, economically, everything, safety-wise. So, when we turn it into actionable insights, really does help drive that, especially if you understand the interrelationship of those metrics and what happens when you actually start to change the activities you have and measure them on something that is far upstream. The case in point is, for example, we use, how do we know if we increase the amount of garbage that we're putting into the boiler? If we increase that amount, what is the impact on our emissions and our profits? And how does that impact? It's a daily decision. But all of those things, it speaks back to the connectivity of data, understanding the supply chain and the credibility will get us to a point where we can actually make very tactical decisions on a moment-by-moment basis with the long-term objectives in mind.
So, Charles, being in the environmental world, there must be a lot of regulations that Covanta needs to comply with. We hear about, in the data world, we talk about and hear about GDPR and CCPA and all of these data privacy regulations. You must have a ton of regulations that you need to comply with. And what does that look like from a data perspective?
Well, that data is the same data that we have to track for all of our emissions. And we are subject to a lot of regulatory constraints and guidelines that we need to adhere to. But we look beyond what we have to do to meet those regulations. I spoke earlier about how we publish our emissions data, and we do far more detailed reporting to the environmental agencies to show that we're being a good ecological partner. But moreover, what the regulations set up are what we have to do. But what we strive for with environmental justice is environmental excellence, not what we have to do, what we should do for the planet. So it's a natural leap. That's just the starting point that we move from, to say, we're not just going to say we're within permit limits. We care more than that. We are truly seeking to be a carbon negative provider of waste management solutions.
That sounds like a lot of different groups and interests and things that you need to balance. And we know that data is always changing, and it sounds like your world is always changing as well. And we know that we've gone through a challenging couple of years. How has data helped you navigate the past couple of years within this evolving landscape that you're operating within?
Well, one such example was the pandemic. Nobody knew what this was going to do, how it was going to impact our business. So we deeply dug into the roots of our data to understand the metrics that would drive our business and develop a hedging of what could affect us negatively coming out of this, price pressures, et cetera, and volume changes, and figure out how do we operate optimally, keeping our costs in check while we understood this. And that helped. Another one was understanding how to bring people back to the office. There were a lot of concerns as people started to come together as to what mattered. We had employee surveys, and it wasn't just doing statistical analysis on multiple choice questions. The real magic was in the comments. How did people feel? And using data and data science to understand the nature of those discussions in combination with their survey responses, allowed us to target where do we need to put the most energy and resources to make people feel comfortable. Another one that actually we dig into what people are truly saying is in things like environmental justice communities where we operate. We need to understand what the people in the area are saying and separate that from outside parties who also have an agenda, and they have a point of view, and it's worth listening to. But our bigger focus is, do you live in that community? And we found that as we start to look at what they're saying, it really helps us see, well, what does matter, and how do they view us as a partner in their community? And some interesting things have come out, that we are a great provider of jobs. People generally like having us there if they even know we're there. And that's actually kind of good, because you think we have a big facility that's operating this way, you would think there'd be some sort of visible impact, and a lot of people don't even know we're in their communities.
So, Charles, you touched on something there about environmental justice. I think that was the term you used. So we've seen this thing emerging over the past couple of years, maybe prior to that, called ESG, environmental sustainability and governance. And so we at IDC have started to look into this as well and do some surveys to understand what, why and where and how this is important to organizations. One of the things that we recently learned is that not having access to enough quality data to accurately assess and report emissions is a top concern across all regions around the globe. But there's an even more significant concern in AP and EMEA. Are you getting involved in ESG initiatives, and how do you see data playing into that within the work that you're doing at Covanta?
Yes. We predominantly operate in North America and Europe. And one of the things that we feel at Covanta is, in order to be good partners, we need the confidence and trust of the business leaders and the community and the politicians where we operate. And to do that, we publish emissions data at an excruciating level of detail to demonstrate that even though our permits allow us to operate at certain thresholds, we are continually striving to operate well below those thresholds. And in doing so, we put that on our public website. If you go to Covanta.com, you can see our self-printed report cards on this stuff. And it really provides some confidence that we are transparent and truly committed to the ecological impact we have. And in that, we really are reliant on the data and the processing of the data and getting it from the facilities where we operate. We have to make sure we've got a good pipeline that we can get that in every single day and make sure it's accurate and make sure it's been reviewed and signed off, and that we put it out there for the public to see. It's very, very important, because we do want to have the confidence of the community leaders and the populations where we serve.
So you touched on something there that Jamie and I spoke about earlier, and that's transparency and its role in building trust. And the way that you're providing transparency, even on your company website, I think really helps people build trust in Covanta and what you're doing. Along your journey at Covanta, how did you know that you could trust the data and what it was telling you?
Basically, as I think if you've said, trust is earned, not given, and it's not a black or white thing. So it's been a journey, and it's been critical. And the idiom I like to use over and over again is eyes on glass to fingers on keyboard. I can show you what happened to that data from the moment it left either a fingertip typing it into a keyboard or an Internet of Things sensor, IoT, and how it flows through, and every transformation, movement from table to table. Not that most people are going to want to see this, but the fact that we can makes them trust us more. The fact that we are being transparent in how we are managing the data makes them trust the data more. And we've opened up our data catalog where we manage this supply chain to everybody at Covanta so they can see it. We have nothing to hide. Everything is there. There's no mysteries. And I'm not saying our data is always perfect, but because we have good data supply chain management, we have a mechanism to continually pursue perfection. It's always a journey. It's not truly an end state.
So you talked a little bit about the people that are using the data at Covanta. At IDC, we've coined this term generation data, or Gen D for short, to mean anyone that works with data in their daily activities. Can you give us an idea of who at Covanta is accessing that data and leveraging that data in the work that they do to support the business operations and strategy?
I would say almost everybody uses the data, even the people who don't necessarily consider themselves users of the keyboards and the computers. Everybody uses the data one way or another. The trick is to balance the access to the data and transparency with the security, should they have it. And we do have that in place. We generally use the reporting tools for this, including Talend's pipeline designer, to help people create their own data sets so long as they have the appropriate access. You spoke earlier about data democratization, and we see this. The individuals and teams, they want to manipulate the data and develop deeper understandings. And this is actually part of our supply chain management methodology, because they create new information products from insights that their years of experience can bring to the table. They may look at something a different way than anybody else has, and that can quickly become another piece of information that can drive that new world where we are making better decisions and faster. But if you want to democratize your data, you must have a democracy. People must be able to see, access, and weigh in on it. And that's what we are working with.
I imagine it does sounds easy, but I know it's not easy, having been in this industry for over 30 years. And I also know through the work that we've been doing, the research that we've been doing, a lot of the things that are driving the need for transparency, driving the need to capture that intelligence about the data, are also the very things that are pushing back the headwinds that people are facing as they're trying to do that. What are some of the challenges that you faced at Covanta in improving the use of data and improving that transparency into data?
I think this was a challenge, but also an opportunity. When I got to Covanta, there was no formal data program, so it was greenfield. Mm-hmm. And while they were investing in establishing the role, there wasn't any sort of funding for a foundational program to at least get things started. So what we did is I built out a data strategy that laid out a roadmap of what we were going to accomplish in the various years. And I looked at any sort of an initiative is generally a data-driven initiative, or at least it should be. And in doing that, when there was an IT project involved, we used that to provide some of the building blocks that we would put within the framework of that data strategy to move us forward. And every initiative we delivered not only brought measurable value to the business, but it also took us further down the road in maturity. So we are now an organization that's making data-driven decisions. I'm really proud of that. We've always got more to go, but who doesn't? And it's an exciting time to be here.
Sounds like that's something that you should be proud of. And imagine that the effects of what you've done are visible. What kinds of effects, what kind of changes has this made in things like customer satisfaction and perhaps even revenue?
So since people can access the data to make decisions faster, they can also understand the cause and effects of things sooner. And that's leading us towards the ability to have significant revenue growth over the coming years. But also by saving time, not having to chase our tails and getting all the information we need, we have a lot more energy into know what levers we can throw to make that happen, that cause and effect. People are no longer as caught up in second guessing, double checking, and trying to rationalize different answers to the data. So everything they're doing now is based on data, and that's a big change. It's a whole cultural shift. It's taking time. It's not done, but we are well on our way.
That likely has a fairly good impact on your operational costs as well, if people aren't second guessing things. Have you seen your operational efficiency increase and your costs go down?
Absolutely. Some of the things that we're seeing as impacts on operational costs is we are seeing dramatic drop-offs in redundant data entry. And even when the data was the same, that's still a lot of wasted time. It's worth approximately $2 million a year in wasted labor for redundant data entry. We're well along the way of hitting that on an annual savings. And that's particularly good for us because in a world where everybody's challenged to find talent, we need people focused on the things that matter because it's very hard to find the people to fill all the roles. So people need to be efficient. And now people are acting instead of guessing. Analysis paralysis is avoided, and they're doing something about it.
Quite often I've spoken to a lot of different organizations, and 2 or 3 people show up at a meeting with their own spreadsheet, and they're all different.
Yes.
And that does not help trusting data at all. So it sounds like you've made some progress in that area.
Definitely. It was always a question of, whose version of the truth is right, whose spreadsheet is more right, whose was more timely. And those discussions are becoming few and far between around here.
That's great to hear. That's great to hear. So as you think about planning for next year, what's top of mind? What are your priorities for Covanta?
So my biggest thing is how do we start to move into cognitive intelligence? I look at business intelligence as having several phases, and everybody who ever did reporting is looking at it reflectively. And then we started moving into predictive forecasting. How do we think we're going to do? And then we start moving into prescriptive of what should we do. And that's a good thing to be in. But if we're really going to benefit from true artificial intelligence, we need to be able to have that data supply chain providing an AI framework with the ability to actually take actions. We're not there yet, but it's in our 5-year rolling roadmap. Some of the big drivers and enablers of this as we've started to standardize our metrics and KPIs so that we can truly understand the interrelationship. And in addition to that, we've moved because a good data strategy has 2 components, data management and data use. And the data management is really the blocking, the tackling, the tools, the methods. We've gotten that really solidified over the last 3 years. But now the data use strategy is are we going to grow the business? What do we need to know? How will we measure it? And what levers can we throw? All of that forces us to dive deeper into the grassroots/weeds of data and relationships between those metrics to be confident that we are truly going to be able to define our own future rather than responding to variables around us.
Yeah, we're definitely starting to see AI coming into play a lot more. Step back for a moment. If we think about AI being used to predict or make a decision on data in terms of how the business is going to operate, your data has to be trustworthy. You can't have, the decisions that AI makes is only as good as the data that the algorithm learned from, and so your data has to be good. But the other place that we're seeing AI coming into use a lot more is within the data management piece. You talked about data management, data use. It's being brought into the data management, being used a lot more to again, leveraging that metadata, leveraging that intelligence about the data to learn from the data and to learn where data is not good, where data can be improved, even make some decisions on improving that data. But then it's also connecting to the use side. It's bringing forward to the use, making recommendations. I think that's probably where we're going to get to first in making recommendations. I don't think people, as you said earlier, I don't think people are quite ready for the machine to make the ultimate decision yet.
No. The way I look at it is, initially I look at it as somewhat of an apprenticeship. A good artificial intelligence entity will start by merely studying what people are doing. In time, they might make some suggestions to say, did I get it right? And what's critical is the person provides a feedback loop that says not only yes or no, but if it's no, why not? So additional learning can occur. And then in time, the apprentice becomes more of an assistant to help the person make better decisions. And as you start to evolve, the person will start to trust that the AI can help drive this. And it's not a thing about getting rid of jobs. Frankly, in many parts of the world, populations are declining, and it's harder and harder to fill certain jobs. So people are needing assistance to get the same results in a declining workforce situation. And I think artificial intelligence is going to be the next big leap that creates those productivity jumps, just like the internet, just like the Industrial Revolution, just like the printing press. I think AI is it. It can be scary, but if we have a good pipeline of data, that if we have the transparency in how these things work, and we can actually be the masters of our own future and drive better outcomes.
It's always fun to look into the future. Let's bring it back. Let's bring it back to today. Charles, what would be some of your advice for our audience as they go away from Connect and they get back into their seats and they need to plan a path forward?
I would say probably the biggest thing to do is do not lose sight of getting your data use strategies in place, where the business partners define what the organizational objectives are, numerically set goals for them, and understand how to actually impact those goals with data. You need to establish the accountability, and from a tactical perspective, you do need a good pipeline of truth so that they can reliably do these things. So as you roll into KPIs and people start picking out things that they want to measure, make sure that those KPIs and metrics are aligned with and driving what the higher level KPIs are for the organization. If your growth objective is EBITDA and that is your primary, everything else should fall in line with supporting the growth one way or another. It won't be a one-for-one outcome, you'll find, but you will find that there are many combinations of things that are contributory, and when you understand that, you will get better outcomes for your business.
That's great advice. Thanks, Charles. It's been a pleasure speaking with you today, getting to know you a little bit more and learn more about your data journey at Covanta.
Thank you, Stewart. It's been a pleasure speaking with you as well.